In this video, we'll be building LEGO Dinosaur Fossils Tyrannosaurus Rex. This set comes with 3,145 pieces and was just released on March 1st of this year. I'm really looking forward to this. It's definitely a pretty big set, so let's get started. Okay, hopefully you're still with me. So this is LEGO set 76968, the Tyrannosaurus Rex fossil. This set comes with 3,145 pieces and retails in the US for $249.99. This is actually a Jurassic Park set, kind of an addition to many of the smaller fossil heads that they've done. But as you can see, it's a much bigger set, a full-scale model of the T-Rex. I recently did one of the the fossil heads, and I remember thinking to myself, it'd be cool if they built the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and sure enough, a month later, here we are. This is a very big set. This set is about 3 feet long, and it has a pretty long tail. You can't even get it on the camera here, but it's pretty big. The first thing it has down here at the bottom, there's a printed placard for the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It talks a little about the dinosaur, as well as have the Jurassic Park logo here. And then there's 2 minifigures, and they're digging a fossil here on this little placard too. The functionality of the set is primarily just a display piece, honestly, and it really looks good. I had a lot of fun putting this together. There's a lot of pieces, but it did take me a while. So the head of the set does, so the mouth does open. It has some really good, some of these longer pointed pieces to indicate the teeth, and it kind of it goes all the way up and down like that. That's a pretty cool feature. It's pretty mobile and moves up and down. And then the head does move up and down, and it does turn left to right. It doesn't go, it turns on the axis left and right and goes up and down. So that's pretty much the rest of the set, though. Looks really good, as you can tell from the front here. These are the 2 little arms that come out on the front. Here they have just pretty much built a kind of connecting piece right off the skeletal body and kind of put them together here with a bunch of the more of these pointed pieces from the sides here. I do like the detail that they've made with the skeletal pieces and all of these pointed slope pieces. These slope pieces that define the back of the T-Rex here, all the way along the spine of the T-Rex, and it goes all the way, I'll get to the minute, in the tail. Again, you have all these cool little skeletal pieces here to indicate the ribs, and down here, these are all cool to kind of put together. And it's pretty much the same on the other side. And then the legs did take a while to build, but I thought that they were really cool to build. It has some really cool, again, some more pointed pieces to indicate the toes, and it's kind of standing on this sort of grassy area here. And then the legs. The tail is actually a pretty cool part of this set. So the tail does extend out over the base here, and it turns 3 different ways. So it turns left and right at this angle, turns left and right at this angle, and then again at the end, it does turn left and right. And again, there's 4 points as the end. 1, 2, 3, 4. Really nice feature. I do think, again, that this set, it did take me a while. It's like 25 bags, so it took a little while to build this, but it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of detail. The T-Rex sits on a pretty sturdy base. This black base here, on a rocky, grassy area. But you basically have to get this thing around. You have to kind of pull it and hold it by the sides, and that's the way you got to get it around. You can't really hold it or maneuver it any other way, but it's an excellent display piece. It's a very big set, 3 feet long. So before you build this, make sure you have space for it. There are no stickers in this set, which also is a pretty. But overall, I had a lot of fun building this. Ordinarily wouldn't buy a set like this, but for 3,000 pieces and $250, I'd say this is definitely worth it. If there are actually 3 instruction manuals in this set about the T-Rex, and here it talks. There's a picture here of the T-Rex from the movie in front here. Talks a little bit about dinosaurs, and then it has a couple cool pictures here of the T-Rex himself, mostly from the film. Talks here a little bit about building blocks of life, and then there's a picture of the designer here, who talks about a little bit about some how he put the set together, and a couple of quotes there from the designer. And here again, it talks a little bit about the T-Rex and how it came together in Lego form. And then there's also a couple pictures here. So this is a dinosaur fossil picture, I believe, and it looks like it's in a museum. And then it talks a little just about how to get your model around, because it is so big, you really can't, you have to be careful how you move it around. There's a little repetitiveness, obviously, when you have to build both sides of this, especially with the legs and then the tail and the body. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this, especially for $250 for just over 3,000 pieces. It was a lot of fun to build, and I enjoyed it. And I think certainly if you're looking for a nice display piece, or even you're into these Jurassic Park sets, this one is definitely for you. So again, I hope you enjoyed this build, and if you did, I'd appreciate you clicking on like and subscribe. And once again, I appreciate your support, and thanks for watching.